Welcome to episode 2 of Two Brothers in Christ. This is Joe and Tom. We're back. Tom, how are you doing?
Doing good, Joe. How about you?
Doing good. Yeah, we were doing a little bit of troubleshooting today, getting all this audio and video, getting it pristine. Like it's the first episode. That pilot episode,
Yeah,
feeling it out, seeing what works, what doesn't work. But I think we got a good system going now.
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I think episode 1 was a good episode. It was fun. Yeah, and I think as we explained in previous episode, going forward now we're gonna be just chipping away at other chapters within the Bible, and specifically right now, folks aren't aware, we talked about Matthew 1, and now basically we'll be looking at Matthew 2. So Tom and I had done a little due diligence. We read a bit. We got some notes, and we're just gonna dive right into this and see where this discussion takes us.
Yeah.
So,
Just
yeah.
for the audience there. So if you guys are new to the channel, just remember where we start off in the last episode, Matthew 1, which is also episode 1. If you guys want a little quick introduction of me and Joe, it takes about like 20 minutes and what we're trying to do for the show, you can just go back there. So we're going to try to refer you here and there throughout, the episode, so you guys can go back there if you want to get to know some of our backgrounds. And just before we get started, Joe, I just want to mention here, so if you guys would be so kind as to either follow our channel, subscribe, follow us, it would mean the world. Takes 2 seconds and it would help us a lot.
Awesome.
So you want to hit the hay here? You want to get started?
Yeah, for sure. So, and I'll give a quick recap. So Matthew 1, very high level. It was the genealogy and sort of the general birth of Christ. Very Matthew's interpretation. Matthew 2, chapter 2, now focuses on sort of the, again, and just for folks, I'll reiterate for folks for a while, I am using the USCCB Bible. I'm using the website, which is just a Catholic Bible resource here for quick and easy convenience. So the topics that are covered within chapter 2, it's the visit of the Magi. There is the flight to Egypt, the massacre of the infants, the return from Egypt. So quite a few interesting topics today. Lots of little things happening to our friends here, and I think, and I'll kind of get us going here so we can, that's sort of the theme. So again, we're going back to the Christ, who is Christ. It's just sort of everything's written about him. We're getting a little bit more to know about. At this point, we still haven't even been introduced to him. Everything's kind of just in preparation for his birth. So just some of the things I captured for Matthew right off the bat for me, Matthew 2 verse 1. I'll read it out to you as we typically do, just so folks are aware what we're speaking about here. So Matthew 2 verse 1. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem. And again, what I do for any sort of verse, my own thoughts, but I also do, I get my resources from the Golden Chain from St. Thomas Aquinas. I love using that as a reference. You'll hear me mention that time and time again as we chip away through all this stuff in the New Testament. We're looking at just the church fathers. What do they have to say on this verse? What does it mean? What is the opinion on this? And just, I like to have my own opinion on it, and just like, okay, what does the church think about it? The one kind of general thought I thought was cool with this verse, in a sense, was that you had just this theme about, you had people who were non-Jewish, these Magi.
Okay, so just for the audience and myself here, could you explain like a Magi? What is a Magi? It's because it's obviously, it's not a wizard. Is it a noble? What I mean? What does Magi mean in kind of the context of the Bible?
Yeah, that's So another it's a good question, actually. It's interesting. Yeah, it's a kind of an odd word. So this is what people might know them more as the three wise men. This is maybe another way to kind of understand them as. These were basically, there's not a whole heck of a lot learned about them. Of course, there's probably some sense about where they came from, but the idea is that these were basically noble pilgrims from the east. Okay, so right now we're basically in Jerusalem. Okay, where Jerusalem is situated, the idea is that they came from Persia onward. We really actually don't know a heck of a lot about them. There is a tradition, especially in maybe it's well known, but like I'll just share, folks, on my side. For example, in Polish tradition, there's a point where we receive chalk, okay, blessed chalk, and the idea is that we actually write the three initials of the Magi above your doorstep. Maybe other
cultures,
yeah, do the same thing, but it's a tradition that we uphold. But the idea is that, yeah, you write the initials of the three wise men above your doorstep for the year, and just so people are aware, the names that are associated with the three wise men that we know of today are,
I know Balthazar is one of them, right?
Balthazar, Melchior, and Casper. So I think these are the names of the three. Now that we're talking about it, and I don't actually have too much, like, is this sort of the official name? Because again, as or was this sort of a understood name? Because as we read in Matthew 2, no name is listed, right? So it begins to be kind of, well, what is the actual names associated with these three wise men? Who are they? Where they come from? Quite interesting, and I'm sure this is the part where even in episode 1 where I was talking about, there is probably an expert Catholicism history about these things that could probably give you like, oh, this is the best guess about who we think they are. A lot of it's probably just left to tradition at that point. And it's at a certain point too, it's not like with like for Catholics, like it's not the be all and end all to know exactly who these things were. But in some ways, just I guess it is like, there is an importance to maybe see like, okay, could they be tied in with a historical figure or something like that, right? But yeah, so the Magi, just going back to your question, Magi, three wise men, came from the east to give homage to, as we later read, to this baby. They were looking for something.
So it would pretty much amount to like three noblemen, three wise men. They came bearing gifts, right? And that's what, because their gifts, I don't know, they weren't like cheap gifts if for lack of a better word, right? They were kind of pretty fancy gifts,
yeah,
right? So
yeah, as we read later on.
Yeah.
So, and just for my point, like again, I love this point how, and again, a lot of the church fathers sort of mentioned too, you had these non-Jewish people, and this is even tied into the whole mission of Christ, calling in the Gentiles. Gentiles. Who are the Gentiles? The Gentiles were the non-Jews. It's basically everyone else who wasn't Jewish, who in the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, they weren't necessarily, at least in the Jewish understanding, they weren't part of this unique covenant relationship with God. It was really through Christ, kind of where that covenant was extended to the entire world, right? And so you have these, I just love this imagery, right? Already in Matthew 2, he's just building up this image of like God inviting now everyone to him. These people who are not even Jewish to begin with came here. And as we read kind of in Matthew 2, like this is right after the next verse, saying, so I'll read that out as well for folks too, just to finish off the sentence, Matthew 2:2. Where is the newborn King of Jews? We saw his star at the rising and have come to do him homage. It's like, whoa, it's like, what's, and there's so much speculation about this star. What is this star? Was this an actual star? There's lots of little thoughts about as to what that is. But I love the imagery of kind of this, the invitation of all, and just like the idea that he revealed and was kind of like hinting to people outside of the Jewish faith to come. I find it as a nice universal message, for everybody. Like this is for everyone to come. This wasn't just like this little, where the Hebrews and Jews thought this was kind of their thing. Well, no, Christ kind of said, no, this is for everybody now. So I'm not sure. Did you have any thoughts on that, or something?
It's essentially to continue on your point. Like I'm just wondering, like was this kind of just a way of speaking when they said Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem? Were these three wise men, did they know each other at all? Were they from the same region? Were they all over from all over the east? But the fact that it's written from the east, is that just from the east? Did they just come from the east, or was it like all around the world?
Yeah.
You know, these are questions maybe, because if it was just a way of speaking and written therefore in the Bible, was it did they come from all over the world? You know, was the three wise men the main people, and was there more people there? You know, like we can't know for sure. Like you said, there's probably an expert historian or something out there that knows. We don't know. But I don't know. It's all interesting questions, right? Because if he is, like, you know, when they say King of the Jews, then he probably brought in a lot of people, a lot of attention, right? So he was the Messiah, right? So
yeah. And you know what? That's actually, see, this is where, you know, one day, if we get enough people following us, we'll do these little spin-off series, right? Because just this one question alone, right? Like that little thing could be like a podcast in itself, right? So folks, if this is something you're interested in, you want to know more about
let us know.
Let us know, and then we can do a deep dive into these things. I know we said we wouldn't, but like, again, even when we talked last time about divorce, like there is so much.
There's so much to cover,
on a topic, and I think we'd be open to that if folks are interested. So just let us know.
And I'd be willing to do the research for sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%. So, but that's a big question. Yeah, I think there are some good answers, and I kind of mentioned like a few of even for myself. Like, again, I'm not even sure how well known or understood it is even amongst Catholics. It's maybe not even something you think about too much. Again, even broadly speaking, Christians, I'm not even sure outside of the Catholic sphere whether this is even something of interest. But for us, it has tradition in a sense. There is some sort of thing, and it could be, in my case, where I mentioned my experience and how we did it in our household. It may be very Polish, but again, people can chime in. They're like, "Hey, we did this at our household too." Okay, something to learn about.
Yeah.
So I guess continuing on. I know we're already on like a 1, 2, 3. So even Matthew, I like Matthew 2:3, and I'll read that out to you as well. So that this verse, when King Herod heard this, he was greatly troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. I like, this is kind of this like humanly aspect. I love the way the Matthew, one of the apostle, just the way he writes, and he's it's kind of like, I guess, because again, as I mentioned in episode 1, like he's writing specifically to the Jewish people. And it's interesting, like you would think in the Jewish people in the Old Testament, okay, like, and again, maybe just a bit of a background for this, even one line, they were waiting for their Messiah. They were waiting like for the king to return. And there may have been interpretation about how he would manifest himself as a king. And I think to this day, there is disagreement. That's why we haven't necessarily reconciled that. But just this idea, so like on Matthew's perspective, he's just like, everybody was troubled in all of Jerusalem to think that like, they're looking for the newborn king of the Jews. It's like, why would you be troubled by this? Why is this a bad thing? And the church fathers and others kind of, there's some kind of claim that even Herod himself wasn't necessarily like, I don't know if he was even a full-fledged Jew or something, but it became more or less the discussion was just around this, like, just fear of losing his power, even for the sake of like the...
I'm gonna talk more on that later for sure. Good. So remember that, like the fact that like losing power. Okay, so carry on. So
no, I just again, you would think that the people would be very happy and willing to kind of let this new king come out, which is supposed to kind of fulfill sort of everything that Jewish people were looking for.
And a lot of people were, right? A lot of people were happy. Yeah.
A lot of people were, but as we read, right here, King Herod wasn't. And we learned later on to what extent that fear of losing power drove him in terms of what he eventually did with the innocent infants. It's pretty, it's quite something. So I'm not sure. Did you have anything stand out for you? Or
so the next thing that stands out for me is that Matthew 2:13. I don't know if you had something before that.
No, we can do Matthew 2:13. Yeah.
Okay. So for Matthew 2:13, so there's kind of a huge skip in here, but like we mentioned to you guys before, we're not going to cover every single verse in every chapter, right? So right now we're moving fast forward to the flight of Egypt, which is the second part that Joe mentioned we were going to go into today. And so for Matthew 2:13, I'm just going to read it out here. When they had departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Rise, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I tell you. Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him. And I really love this verse specifically, just because what I find really cool is, like, you'll notice, and even as I speak, you'll notice, because we're going to cover most of them, even in this chapter right here, but it's interesting because you'll notice that a lot of angels, a lot of dreams, Joseph gets a lot of messages, right? So from God, right? Or God or the angels, and I think that's crazy. Like, that's amazing. There's a certain connection that I was gonna say Joe, but Joseph in this case has, right? And I found that really cool. Like, a lot of messages are getting sent to him. You can see that he's a trusted, I was going to say soldier of God, but a trusted, man of God, right? And that's really cool in itself, I find.
And again, interesting too, when we were talking in Matthew 1, like, just, they don't, again, just St. Joseph, we don't know much about him, really. All we see is just this silent man just responding to this, like, again, it's a very unique situation, right? And again, he's responding to angels. They're kind of telling him, rise up, go do this. From what we read, no hesitation. He goes. Again, it's one of the finer points, this idea, this submission, and this is a big theme later on. And there's Matthew 6, Matthew 7. But
I can't wait to get there, dude. I don't
want to spoil it. It's so good. Those are chapters I fall in love with all the time. But just this whole concept of undoing the will of God, and that's huge, because especially as it relates to Christianity, and again, as we tie in more specifically to Catholicism, there's something about that. And just, you see Joseph's response, and you see this kind of even in the Old Testament too, but Joseph, just as we're reading here, just like, yeah, he says to do this and I go do it. There's no arguing with God. There's no debating him, like, well, why would I want to do this? This is inconvenient. He's so, just the framing up of who this man was before in chapter 1, a righteous man, and he had a dream to stay with the Blessed Mother. He has another one with another angel. Like, clearly this Saint Joseph chosen as a stepfather in this case, it's like, okay, this was clearly done for a good reason. So it's one of those things where it's just, that's, again, I mentioned maybe before in the previous podcast, you'd love to know more. It's just like, I want to, who is Saint Joseph? And a lot of what we know, let's say, passed down through tradition. I mentioned that before, some of this traditional knowledge, or knowledge passed down through the saints, or people that may have had visions, let's say. Visions, again, or prophecies, or anything related to that, which, again, this isn't sort of clear articles of the faith, but at the same time, it can be fruitful for the believer, in a sense, where, again, they can have interactions with Saint Joseph, with Christ, Mary, other saints, and they kind of maybe have some insights where you maybe get a glimpse into their character. But even then, it's not something you cling into. And again, going back, like, it's not really the point, right? In a sense, like, you'd love to know more about, well, even just this. I tell you, every time a reference of an angel comes, it's like, okay, yeah, tell me more about this angel. It's like in the Old Testament too, you see that a little bit more with Jacob and Tobit. You hear, the Archangel Raphael came and visited Tobit. It's like, what the heck is happening? One of the 7 archangels standing at the throne of God. It's like, you want to know more, yeah. And that can be a separate, that's another good episode, I think. Just even
100%, yeah.
What angels and demons. But I know people love that topic, and for a right reason. But it's just like, it's not the focus, It's just like Joseph's role is just,
We've discussed this, and the possibility of exploring saints and angels, and maybe not demons, but we'll see. Maybe if there's interest for it, right? You got to know your enemy to be ready for your enemy. You know what I mean? Like, people who deny the devil's existence, like, are puppeteered by the devil himself, right there.
Yeah, exactly, right. So
you got to watch out. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good point right there. you know. So and again, it's what Matthew does in sort of Matthew 2:15. I'll read that out now just to tie it into what you read here and your input here. So Matthew 2:15, he stayed there until the death of Herod, and that what the Lord had said through the prophet might be fulfilled. Out of Egypt I called my son. Again, Matthew, as I mentioned, a Jew writing to Jews, you know, he really had to show, like, it's very important for him to show that through the Old Testament, as we read again later on with the massacre of the infants, he's really trying to show, like, all the things that were spoken about, that you were told about in the past, this is being convinced and manifest right here in front of you. Okay, so it's very interesting. So all these, and again, out of this particular verse, I'm sure we can, where that's related to, that comes from Hosea in this case, and that's, if we ever get a chance to look at that, the prophets themselves. I mean, I've gone through that. It's a difficult read. It's not something you just kind of read casually. There's lots to it, but Matthew obviously knew that this would be a significant thing to kind of tie into kind of the Savior coming out, and he's always trying to tie it back to, like, hey guys, this is coming back from what was told to you before. You know this verse, you know this saying, you know that this is what we were called, you know, who we're called for. Even if we go back to, I know this is kind of going back a little bit, but in Matthew 2:4, okay, and I'll read that for folks. Assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. And then going to verse 5, they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it has been written through the prophet, again another prophet. And then he basically quotes the verse here for Matthew 6, and you Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means least among the rulers of Judah, since from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. They themselves knew, like, they were also looking and they were expecting someone to come, like they were. So it's not a coincidence, you know, later, like, that Bethlehem was the place. Bethlehem was where the massacre later on occurred. So it's, again, it's just that theme, guys. So there's something special about him. The Magi saw him. They're following a star, fulfilling prophecies. This child, who we haven't even talked about yet, is pretty important. Yeah. So just
once again, for myself and the audience here. So you're saying the way he writes, you're talking about, like, Matthew. So explain that a bit. Like, what do you mean when you say, you know, because this is like the letters of Matthew and stuff like that. That's essentially what the New Testament is about, right? It's like witnesses and stuff and letters of the apostles, right? So when you say the way he writes, like every chapter that is named, so Matthew, Luke, all of that is that person, that apostle's testimony of what happened with Jesus Christ. Is that essentially what that is?
Yes, but just as a caveat, just so folks are aware, so the only two apostles that wrote any of the books is now there's the four gospels, right? Of the four gospels, two were written by the apostles. Matthew, he was an apostle, and then we have John, the apostle. The other two, Luke and Mark. Luke was with St. Paul. So Paul, Paul was, which we'll learn a lot about Paul, St. Paul. And then Mark was so Luke was a contemporary of a follower of St. Paul, and Mark, he was a follower of St. Peter, the first pope.
Okay, yeah.
So it's kind of like they were their scribes in a sense, right? So then, but again, each of them writing in different ways. Even in Luke, I think we get a little bit of intro as to who he's kind of directing that message to. Mark, probably more focused on the Romans. It's just a very different style. And John, well, St. John, he writes in a very philosophical, theological, mysterious way. So it's each of them kind of giving the testimony of sort of, of all this. So, but yeah, this is Matthew's, and there's probably a lot of good resources as even to like the chronology. I know, for example, that I think John's gospel came later on. But I think Matthew might have been earlier on. But again, you can kind of see, and again, I keep on mentioning this idea that Matthew is writing to Jews, while the idea is that Luke is writing to a certain audience, Mark as well. So that's what kind of maybe justifies to, hey, why do you have four different gospels? And even someone might be wondering that. It's like, why isn't there just one? Well, there are reasons for that. And to this day, they are harmonious. It's like, so that's, even though, and I'm sure we can kind of get into that later on, that's a tough one. to kind of just like dive into right now, but the idea that they are consistent, even though they may seem inconsistent. I mean, that's a classic way to look at disproving sort of the message. It's just like, well, what Matthew is saying chronologically seems to be different than, say, John, but there is a way to look at that, and I don't want to dive into that too much right now because that's huge, but we'll get into that as we kind of get further. But yeah, that's kind of the framework of the Gospels. And of course the letters, most of them were written by Paul. There were some written by John, by Peter, by Jude, lots of other stuff. Revelation at the end, that's another big one that we'll get into, but written by John as well. So yeah, it's a bit of a mix. But Matthew was one of the apostles that this is the first book that we get.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before we carry on, because you moved on to I think Matthew 2:15, right? So before we carry on there, I just want to go back just one notch to Matthew 2:14 real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to read it out just real quick. So Joseph rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt. Okay, so once again, so the angel, they go to Joseph. He's I find that crazy because the angels know, right? Which the angels were sent by God. The angels know he was the man of the house. He was the protector of the family. He was chosen for this, right? His mission was to make sure that his wife, and child were safe, and his job was to listen, to obey his orders from God and be like, hey, or the angels in this case, and just be like, hey, this is what we got to do. This is how we're going to stay safe. And he followed all those directions, and look what happened, right? He raised, a fine son, and like the son of the world, right? The son of God. So that to me is amazing, right? Like it shows a lot of it shows how important the father of the family is, and that to me is such of huge importance, man. There's so many families out there nowadays, that don't have that fatherly figure, and it's so important, man. And that's awesome how Saint Joseph is essentially the big framework of that. That's like the if you lead by example, you see Saint Joseph. So I don't know. I just wanted to mention that real quick because I found that really cool.
I think even for me, and I think even just to echo your point, just as a role model for a husband, a father, and again, he was a stepfather, but still a father. Like it's amazing how little is spoken, but how much impact that has, right? Because you could think of like, okay, if this was to happen to me, would I be questioning, well, why Egypt? Why not, Libya or somewhere
you think you know
else,
better, right? Yeah, exactly.
We don't hear any of that, right? It's just complete, and it just goes to show his holiness, and just like, this again, for me personally, I know I've mentioned before, it's like as a patron saint of mine, like it always has and always will be sort of this role model. Like it's no better role model than this for any father, husband to sort of imitate. And then we read again that later on he gets another dream, so it's just bombarded with dreams. Like it seems like, man, it's just like within this short amount of time he's getting dreams and visions from angels, which it's not a norm. We don't think that's a norm. Like that's really reserved for very special people and specific situations. So maybe I'll switch now to Matthew 2:16. So this is a sad little tale here. But
big time.
I'll read it out for folks. So Matthew 2:16. When Herod realized that he had been deceived by the Magi, and just so people are aware, and I'm going to take a little break here.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Herod had asked the Magi to come back to him to report the location of Jesus Christ. They, in their own dream, were told not to return to Herod, but to go home another way. So this is where we're kind of going back now to Matthew 16, where he's 2:16. He had been deceived by the Magi. So I'm going to continue. He became furious. Okay, so he's really ticked off. He then ordered the massacre of all boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity, 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had ascertained from the Magi. And then going, just to finish that, you know what, maybe I'll just even read this and then we can chat about that. Then was fulfilled, so this is Matthew 2:17. Then what was fulfilled had been said through Jeremiah the prophet. Again, as I mentioned, Matthew is really tying into kind of what was tying into the prophets, to this whole everything that's happening. And so Matthew 2:18, we read from the words of Jeremiah, "A voice was heard in Ramah, sobbing in loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children, and she would not be consoled since they were no more." So yeah, that's
a rough one, man. That's crazy, dude.
Yeah, his own people. Like, you know, you could speculate so much as to, like, you know, why Herod did this, or, you know, was he worried about losing power? But just think about just that. Yeah, that I don't even know. Even he can't even just describe that in a sense, right? How it's always interesting to think how people thought in this time. Like, you would think that after he would do this, let's say, people would like usurp and like, because he's really only like, there were, out of all the children he slayed, only one of them was the one he was looking for, and by that point, Jesus wasn't even there. He was already on his way to Egypt. So it's just, again, just what a mindset. You think like the King Herod coming in, slaying the children, just like, what?
So this is happening? why I want to go back to that point, right? We mentioned before. So men, right, when they have power, right, capital men, like whatever, like whether it's women or men, just like the human being, right? When you have power, right, it's super hard to let go, and you just want to keep hold of your power. You essentially become obsessed with it. It controls you, right? And this is why he was threatened by a child. He feared babies, right? How it sounds silly, but that's exactly what it was, right? He was so scared of like getting taken down from his throne and from losing that power, right? That he did something so atrocious. He stooped so low as to do that, right? And I actually don't know. So this is a good thing I'm wondering, but I'm wondering if throughout history there has been times where kings have ordered in their kingdom all babies born, because at the time there was a lot of kings, let's say, sleeping around, right? With they were going to brothels and stuff like that, right? So I'm wondering, there was a lot of bastard children out there, right, that were potentially heirs to the throne, and I'm wondering if in history there's like a specific time where something similar happened, where, you know, kings had their power and then they just decided kill all the boys, you know, just so me, like my only son right now would for sure be guaranteed the throne, right? And no, like, children would try to claim it, you know. So I don't know.
Interesting.
This is a lot worse than this, in the sense that, like you said, they were looking for one person specifically, not eliminating anyone who could be the heir of the throne. But I don't know. It's crazy. Like, I wouldn't even be surprised if this stuff happened at one point in history, for sure.
Yeah. When I read this again, it really made me think of, I don't know if this is back in the Old Testament, but Exodus, right, where the Pharaoh had ordered the slaying of. So it's just, I don't know if there's something there, but it's just, and again, whenever we get into Exodus, that's going to be an interesting one. But just the whole idea, right? The saving of one child, right? I don't know if there may be angels tied into it. From my recollection, there really isn't. But of course, God's will kind of guiding all these things just to get this one baby away. That would kind of be, in the end, the freedom of the Jewish people from the hands of the Egyptians, right? And again, there could be allegories, there could be kind of parallels, and, you know, the Lord's trying to, you know, show in some ways between, let's say, Moses, you know, who freed the Egyptians from this, and then Christ who frees us from sin, this broader thing. There is always this. I love St. Paul. I maybe spoil St. Paul a little bit, you know, in a bit, but just this whole concept, from Adam came sin, through Christ came, you know, salvation. He's always kind of paralleling what was the before the shadow, what is the fulfillment, this whole kind of the Old Testament. In some ways, Old Testament, New Testament is kind of that realization. I mean, that's a big topic, but so this too in some ways could have been a maybe Matthew was, he didn't call it outright here, but maybe if they, for the Jewish reader, they'd be like, oh man, this is similar. They would know the Torah by heart, and they could probably see like, okay, yeah, maybe there is some significance to this character. But yeah, that brutality, just what can you say? And we don't hear anything about, like, it's not that, like, the Pharisees and the scribes, again, the big teachers of the time, who we'll read about time and time again later on, who Jesus Christ, he has a lot of beef with them. We don't hear necessarily that they're upset or that they tried to stop Herod. We don't really know. Maybe they were, at a certain point when the king says something, well, what do you do, right? There's also just like, well, the king does so, therefore it is. But you would think that, the Pharisees and the scribes who know scripture, prophecy so well, they'd be like, dude, this is the king of the Jews. This is a big deal. You shouldn't go massacring. We don't really know. I don't know. It's I kind of also think in some ways they were complicit because they almost also wanted their power in a sense, because Christ he's a threat to all in a sense, in a weird way. If you're his enemy or you're not with him, well, like deliberately, I'm not saying like someone who doesn't know him, but like if you don't want him to be your king, I guess in some ways maybe you just want to destroy him. I don't know. Maybe there's something to think about. I just kind of a random thought that came in my head there, but. So yeah, sad tale. So I'll jump us to Matthew. So right now we're at the sort of the last part of Matthew 2 here. One point I had was on Matthew 2:19. I'll read it out. So when Herod had died, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt.
Again, man. That's what I'm saying, bro. It's nonstop.
I love it. This is just, again, and just I'll finish up what he said there. And the angel said, rise, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. And then Matthew 2:21, he rose, took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. That's it. Done. He just did it, It's just say Joseph's style throughout this whole thing. Yeah, do this again. I know you mentioned, like, I think you used the
man
word
of
soldier.
Focus, man. Yeah,
man
soldier,
of focus,
yeah.
but even a soldier, and some just taking orders and following it through, no hesitation. And I like that they do. It's interesting with soldiers. I know I like the idea of maybe bringing up soldiers for your sake too, because you are a soldier, right? But again, later on as we read, I think if people there for just even our thumbnail, our picture, I think you can see it on Spotify and everything. We have the centurion approaching Jesus there, which we'll talk about later. But just, man, it's interesting with soldiers. And even later on, the soldier at the cross who was moved by the whole experience, who we believe converted at the death of Christ. Soldiers keep on coming up. So I don't know. It's an interesting tale for people, for men to think about. Of course, women too, in their own capacity. But just I think that's an important message for men to hear too. But yeah, just so folks are aware. I wanted to read. Where was this? No, I think this is related to another point. But I think from the. Yeah, no, okay, that's actually different. But yeah, just focusing on Joseph, I think, again, I just wanted to mention, I think this is just kind of wrapping up the many occasions where he just excelled at listening, role model for us. We gotta follow that. Did you have anything else for on this little section here?
Yeah, so essentially, the last part I want to mention there is just Matthew 2:23, and I'm just going to read it out here. So he went and dwelt in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He shall be called a Nazarian, right? So what I want to emphasize on is, like, essentially, right? So a lot of people get confused, me included, and we call him, right? So we hear all the time Jesus of Nazareth, right? But you got to remember that he was born in Bethlehem, right? So he was born in Bethlehem. Then in between, he went to Egypt, and then finally he went to Nazareth, right? So it's crazy how he moved around. It's just he had to move around so much as a baby, as a child, because of the constant threat against his life, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned those exact three things, because those are the exact three things that Matthew is trying to convey to the people, that this is what's been prophesized. This has been prophesied to you. And it's an interesting prophecy. Like, it's a pretty complicated prophecy to fulfill, right? Born in Bethlehem, called out of Egypt, but called a Nazarene. It's like, how in the world can you connect these impossibilities, right? Like, this is, wait, who could fulfill those criteria? Matthew's saying, this is the criteria. this is how it's fulfilled, right? In a sense, like it's almost like, guys, there's no question about this. No one else could fulfill this very specific thing. I'm telling you, this is where he was born. This is, we knew this in the land of Judah. He was called out of Egypt, according to another prophet, and that he would be called a Nazarene, according to another prophet. And in this case, prophet, let me see the reference here. Actually, it's something we can look at later. I'd have to actually see what that's related to. But time and time again. So interesting. Like Matthew is just really, really trying to emphasize to these people. And I it's something to appreciate. Like it's you could kind of maybe just read this casually and not see sort of the significance of these things. But I guess this is why it kind of helps to read through it several times. I mean, even if the funny thing is, if we read, after like 10 years, we do this again, Matthew 2.
Yeah.
My gosh, like it's going to be a totally different world, like what you can kind of unravel the onion layers. But just for me personally, and maybe it'll be different for you, but for me personally, going through Matthew 2, it's just this focus on the fulfillment of the prophecy. And it's a very complicated prophecy to fulfill. But it seems like this man who we haven't even really gotten to know yet, this child who's been kind of running back and forth from Egypt to Nazareth, he's the one. So I don't know, it's pretty intense.
Yeah man, it's crazy. So there's a lot of different, I think, parts in Matthew that we're gonna emphasize on, that we're gonna talk more on, and different parts. But this one was definitely crazy in the sense that just the fact, the massacre of the infants, just that is crazy in itself, right? It's crazy at what lengths men will go to hold on to their power, the greed at which they do the horrific things they do.
Yeah, and probably that's still today in some ways, right? I mean,
it'll be a lot more clandestine, I think, but still present for sure.
Yeah, in our own way, right? And I could almost see that as like a parallel to our own, again, this Herod in relation to Joseph, right? You have within this one chapter, you have Joseph, who's just, I will do everything you say, and of course, out of love and everything with the Father, God the Father. Herod is like, I'm going to destroy your son. It's like you have this like. And this light, this darkness, this theme. I love that theme in a sense. Maybe it's an oversimplification of how this beautiful journey of evil, good, this triumph of Christ over death, all these things. But just that's actually another little theme that just kind of really pops out. You got Joseph on one end, Herod on the other, the protector and stepfather of Christ, the other one who wants to destroy everything.
Destroyer, yeah.
And it's just like. And just God's way of, again, just like as much as man's power is to kind of work against God in every step of the way, like, what, I'm going to destroy. And sadly, he did destroy these innocent children. Like, that's the thing, right? And of course, we believe in judgment. All these things will be righted. But it's a very sad tale in that sense. But in the sense that Herod's foolishness to think that he could stop the Son of God from kind of doing what he has to do. Yeah, that's the, I guess that's the ultimate punishment there. Just like, do you not know who God is in a sense? And I think maybe in some ways a lot of people's relationship is like that with God. And that's probably, again, not judging anyone. That's something that probably comes with time. That probably through reading scripture, as we're trying to do, to kind of get a better understanding of things from our own perspective. But I think that's something for all of us to reflect on, for sure.
Do in later chapters and verses, do we ever hear what happens to King Herod, or does it just like die down after this?
Yeah, it's so later on we're going to hear of another King Herod. Okay, that's later on when Christ is almost crucified. But the idea is that, and it's interesting you said that, because I have a quote from Saint Jerome on this. I'll just read that. So the Herod mentioned then is not the same Herod as now. So
okay, yeah.
The way he kind of mentioned. So Herod, and I'll read what he wrote, Saint Jerome here. But the Herod who was then and later on was made friends with Pilate. We'll learn about Pilate.
Oh yeah.
And maybe he has glimpses of who Pilate was son of this Herod and brother to Archelaus. So it's not the same Herod. You'll hear, wait, is he alive? No, it's a different different Herod altogether. So this Herod, that's it. Is all we know really right now. And actually,
you know what? Now that I think about it, in Matthew 2, it says, because the angel told Joseph to only head back to Israel once King Herod died. And that's when, at that point, when he went back to Israel, he had another dream which said that he shouldn't go back because of his son, King Herod's son at that time, right? That took over for King Herod. And that's when he decided to go to Nazareth. So my bad. I just kind of remembered that part. So yeah.
But it's okay. But it is a good point, because we hear Herod here, Herod there, just so folks are aware. It's like it's a different Herod altogether. So
okay, yeah. Cool.
All right, man.
All right, so
that's all I had on my part, man.
Yeah. It was a good episode, and like you said, I'm looking forward to dive into Matthew 4, 5, 6, 7. Though so far that's how far I got, and super interesting. I'm looking forward to discuss it with you for sure.
Awesome talk as always.
Yeah. All right, so yeah, on that note, just one more reminder: if you guys could like and subscribe and follow and whatnot, it'd be super appreciated from us, and we'd love to hear your guys' comments on stuff. We also have a YouTube channel, so if you want to go check that out, if you just want to listen to the audio or look at our beautiful faces and comment there, we can definitely we'll definitely do our best to read every single comment, reply to every single comment, and stay in touch with you guys. So that being said, you got anything else to add there, Joe?
No, great talk, and looking forward to Matthew 3, man.
Yeah, man. So we'll see you all next week, and peace be with you.
Thanks, everyone, and God bless. Take care.